Hi, I'm Charles Feldman, and welcome to another edition of SOS America. Let me just briefly recap what this particular podcast is about. It is about trying to have a conversation with various people about America, what is happening in America, how it impacts people in other parts of the world. In other words, how it may impact you if you're watching or listening to this somewhere outside the United States. Of course, if you happen to be here, you are more than welcome to come along for this journey. On this particular episode, I'd like to welcome Nathan Hochman, who is the District Attorney for the County of Los Angeles. Mr. Hochman, thanks for being with us. I appreciate you taking the time. And I want to begin because I'm very aware of the fact that different countries in particular have different legal systems, and not all of them, maybe most of them, are knowledgeable about what exactly it is that a district attorney does. So if you can be so kind as to let our viewers know, what exactly do you do?
Well, again, Charles, thank you very much for having me on your show. So, a district attorney of Los Angeles County is in charge of the entire county. And for people who don't understand how exactly the geographic boundaries work in California, let me start from the smallest unit. There's the city. Los Angeles County, for instance, has 88 cities. Los Angeles City is just one of the 88. It represents about 40%, but there's 87 under cities and 125 unincorporated areas just in Los Angeles County. By population, it's over 10 million people. If it was a state in the United States, it would be the eighth largest state in the United States. So you have each one of the cities, not all of them, by the way, but roughly 12 of the 88 cities have city attorney offices. Now, a city attorney office is in charge of basically adult misdemeanors. So misdemeanors in basically the United States, a low-level crime is called a misdemeanor. That could be like driving under the influence. It could be trespassing. The higher level crimes are called felonies. District attorneys are in charge of the felonies for everybody, whether it's adults or juveniles. District attorney are responsible for the misdemeanors and felonies for juveniles, and district attorneys in Los Angeles County are responsible for the misdemeanors for adults for 72 out of the 88 cities. Now, above the district attorney is the Attorney General of California. There's actually 58 district attorneys spread throughout California. The Attorney General of California is sort of like all of our bosses. And separate and apart from the state of California system, there's the federal system. The federal system in California is represented by a United States attorney. They actually, just to make it more confusing, divide California by four districts. There's Southern, Central, Northern, and Eastern. So we fall in Los Angeles in the Central District of California. That's Los Angeles County and the surrounding 7 counties. So when a crime is committed, let's say the crime of violence, let's say you attack a police officer. Arguably, that could be conceivably a city attorney violation if it's the lowest level and occurs, let's say, in Los Angeles. But most likely, that would be a felony crime, landing in the district attorney's office. Conceivably, you could have the attorney general also has a chance to prosecute a felony. They step in occasionally on some cases, and it can also be a concurrent federal crime. The U.S. attorney's office can prosecute that crime as well. So amongst these all jurisdictions, we try to work it out. Not perfectly every time, but we in the district attorney's office do 180,000 criminal cases every single year. I've got basically about 750 prosecutors, 2,100 overall staff. My budget's over $500 million. And again, you know, we spread ourselves in offices throughout the county. If you have any idea of the geography of LA, it's 4,000 square miles. We go all the way down to Long Beach in the south, all the way up to Lancaster and Antelope Valley, over to the eastern part of the San Gabriel Mountains, down to Santa Monica, Malibu, and the entire Los Angeles city. So hopefully that gives you an overall idea of what we do, and then we can get into the specifics of what we actually do in a particular case.
Well, you mentioned in passing, as you were sort of going through this maze of legal jurisdictions, uh, federal jurisdiction, and this is where I think, at least for a viewer or listener outside the U.S. in particular, it probably gets somewhat confusing because I dare say that, especially with some of the items in the news of late, uh, one couldn't blame somebody who's not in the U.S. for thinking, well, isn't it the federal government that decides all these things? They hear, messages from the White House or from the current occupant of the White House, President Trump, saying, I want this done, or I want that done, or I want this enforced, or I want that enforced. Where does that all fit into this mosaic?
Well, let me use a historical example that many people might remember. It was the Rodney King prosecution back in 1992. What happened is you had four police officers basically beat up Rodney King, the motorist, after they stopped him, and it was caught on video. One of the first times any crime really got caught like that on video. So originally, the state, that was actually the DA's office back in 1992, well before I came into office, prosecuted those four officers. All four officers got acquitted. Then it led to riots, if you remember, right after that
Yeah.
verdict. The federal government stepped in. I was actually part of the federal team back in the early 90s. I didn't actually get to try the case, but I helped them investigate the case. So the federal government had concurrent jurisdiction, overlapping jurisdiction. The state could basically use a sort of violence against an individual type of criminal laws. The federal government went on civil rights violations. So the federal government actually brought the case, convicted several of the officers, and they actually went to prison as a result of it. So those are situations, and it's fairly rare where you'll have two different prosecutions on the same exact type of crime. But for instance, with the most recent protest-related crimes, the DA's office is actually arrested and or we didn't arrest, law enforcement arrests, and then we're prosecuting people who shot commercial grade fireworks at police officers, who dropped bricks on police cars, who tried to light them on fire, who attacked police officers, who engaged in felony vandalism and graffitied historic buildings, even looting that occurred during these protests. We made a very clear demarcation that if someone wants to legitimately protest, we'll actually protect their First Amendment right to do so. And we did that for hundreds of thousands of people. But for the couple of hundred people who decided to use the protests as cover to commit crimes, we prosecuted a whole bunch of them. The federal government is prosecuting a lot of those people who went after National Guardsmen, federal law enforcement agents, ICE agents. So they have separate prosecutions going on, and we have our prosecutions in large part when they went after local law enforcement.
When you talk about these protests, Nathan, we should point out that these protests here in LA that you're talking about were in response largely to a new immigration policy that is coming out of Washington. And this is where it gets, it seems to me, and maybe to viewers of this particular podcast, this is where it kind of gets somewhat sticky in terms of how you have to proceed vis-a-vis the federal government, vice versa. California is a sanctuary state. The city of Los Angeles is a sanctuary city. So I'm sure right now there are people who are going, what the hell is a sanctuary state and what the hell is a sanctuary city? Can you take a couple of minutes to describe what that is, and then we'll go on from there to get to the point that I want to make. Go ahead.
Certainly. So back in 2017, California passed SB 54, which was the original sanctuary state legislation. Now, what it basically prohibits is informal cooperation amongst local law enforcement and the federal civil immigration authorities. Because in the old days, what used to happen is that the federal civil immigration authorities, and this happened for literally decades through the Obama presidency and whatnot, they would say, look, when you're done with that particular individual who's going through the criminal justice system, we're going to give you an informal detainer. We would like you then to hand them over to us. So SB 54 eliminated the ability to have this informal cooperation, but it had two major carve outs. The first carve out is if the federal civil immigration authorities presented a judicially signed warrant for someone's arrest, that warrant would be honored 100% at all times. Also, there was a carve out if someone committed certain violent offenses. They said if that person committed those level offenses, you could have that type of cooperation. That actually got challenged in the courts. The courts sustained and affirmed the legislation. So fast forward to 2024, 2025, and now you have a situation where the federal civil immigration authorities aren't coordinating with local law enforcement. They're not telling local law enforcement who, what, where, and how they're going to actually go into your community and effectuate federal civil immigration law enforcement. They're not presenting warrants for the arrest to local law enforcement. They're going in and arresting these people themselves. And again, there's no coordination between the DA's office and the federal civil immigration authorities, nor the local sheriffs or police. The problem is, of course, is that when they came in, and this happened back in early June, they came in to arrest some people. They didn't tell local law enforcement. In fact, they went after a local business that they believed was employing an illegal individual, people who are illegally here. Then what happened is several hundred people found out this was going on, and they surrounded them. Now, when you don't coordinate with local law enforcement, you don't have local law enforcement basically keeping people back. So now you had federal agents that were surrounded by hundreds of people, and they're not into crowd control. They didn't have a good crowd control idea. Now it can get dangerous because they need to actually exit that scene without anybody attacking anybody else. And what happened over the ensuing days is that hundreds grew to thousands, grew to tens of thousands, ultimately grew to hundreds of thousands of people. Now local law enforcement have to get involved because they got to make sure that all these protesters can legitimately march up and down the streets, particularly in downtown LA, that they can congregate in certain areas and it's safe for them to do so. In other words, you have to section off literally streets without any knowledge where these people are going to go as they're marching up and down your streets because you don't want cars crashing into them. You don't want, again, any violence occurring to legitimate protesters. So local law enforcement got put in a horrible bind because all of a sudden these arrests are occurring in different parts of the community. They don't know where the next arrest is going to be. Then if a protest emerges, they got to quickly jump into action and deal with the sort of ability to control a crowd and channel them in directions where they can scream their heads off at people, but not engage in any violence. So again, there's no necessary end in sight here. There is no coordination. I had to deal with one of these situations where we were prosecuting two Chilean nationals who had engaged in organized retail theft, a very big issue here in this county. So as we were in the middle of this prosecution, when these individuals stepped into the lobby and outside, apparently, again, they were not here with proper documentation, they got arrested. So all of a sudden, my prosecution in state court that was going to hold these people accountable for stealing for people in my county got stopped. That doesn't help, criminal enforcement at all. And again, that prosecution will get a bench warrant out, but if we don't get the individuals back, that prosecution goes nowhere until either they come back in this country or eventually they don't, and then they don't have a conviction on their records.
How are you then, as a district attorney, able to navigate this particular dilemma? Because on the one hand, you swear an oath, right, to defend the U.S. Constitution, but also to defend the California Constitution, right? Uh, and and yet it's kind of schizophrenic here now because you've got the White House saying that immigration officials have the right to come into a community. They don't need to be announced. They don't need to coordinate with local law enforcement, and they need to be able to do their job. Yet you, as a district attorney in the county of Los Angeles, have an obligation, as you were just talking about, to uphold the law here, but to also make sure that the law is upheld in a systematic, legal, and in a way that is acceptable to all the different parties involved. How do you navigate all this? Because it seems like it's impossible to do.
It is a bit frustrating. I'll be very candid because on the one hand, we certainly have many areas where we do cooperate with the federal government and have done so for decades, whether it's drug enforcement, most recently fentanyl enforcement, whether it's human trafficking, whether it's certain type of fraud, elder abuse. I mean, a whole variety of categories where we are on task forces with the federal agents. Environmental crimes, for instance, is another example. And we cooperate very successfully with them. This seems to be an area where, again, we're making our positions known. So, for instance, if I have witnesses or victims in crimes that don't have proper documentation to be here in this country, it doesn't mean that they weren't victimized by other individuals in our community who took advantage of them. Very often we see that with human trafficking. We see that with workplace fraud and wage theft. And we want these people to come into court to testify against the people who victimize them and to feel that they can do so safely. A lot of these victims aren't showing up. We have witnesses in very serious cases, murder cases, that we're having great difficulty getting to come to court because they're worried that if they come to court, they may be picked up by ICE or other agents. So again, we do our best to make our concerns known, but they're operating in a separate silo. They're not coordinating with us. They're going to do what they're going to do, and we're going to just have to respond as best we can to make sure that the wheels of justice keep turning in this county, notwithstanding what's going on from the outside.
But am I hearing you correctly, Nathan? Because it seems like what you're saying, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, so if I got this wrong, by all means, let me know. But it seems like what you're saying is that, on the one hand, while the federal government is trying to rightly, I suppose, get people out of the country who shouldn't be in this country to begin with, some, not all, of whom have criminal backgrounds, that in the effort to do that, and because of the lack of communication with local law enforcement, that the downside is, it seems to me, what you're saying, is that a whole host of other crimes, or maybe the better way of putting it, being able to litigate those crimes, are kind of falling by the wayside because you can't get witnesses, as you said, to come to court. Perhaps you can't get even victims to go, to come forward. That seems like a very lopsided system, and I'm not quite sure that if you're trying to balance it, that it's balancing out at all. Am I right, or no?
Well, it certainly has played out that way for the last, what probably at this point, 6 to 7 weeks. I have no idea how long this is going to go on. We're certainly doing our best to make the federal authorities aware of the issues that we have.
Are they
Because
listening? But yeah, but are they listening to you?
it's unclear. I mean, in other words, you don't. It's one of those things where you don't know what you don't know. In other words, I don't
Hmm.
know if they had 10 additional raids planned and they decided not to do 8 of them because of these concerns. So I'm making these concerns known. I think they're legitimate concerns. And to your point, we're not standing in their way. If they want to get, for instance, a judicial warrant and they want to serve it on law enforcement so that we're done with a case against a particular person, and they either win or lose their case, and then they're done with us. They get handed over to the deportation people. Certainly that's valid. I think that the federal government itself, when it prosecutes cases, and it does, where its witnesses are on occasion undocumented, they're probably having the same situations where their witnesses are not, or at least much more reluctant to come forward. It's a balancing situation, and I'm going to continue to do our job. My job is basically to stay out of the politics of this, and every day try to again effectuate justice in this county as best we can. If they make it more difficult, so be it. We'll deal with whatever they present to us, but we're certainly trying to make sure our concerns are well known so that when they're evaluating who they want to target, they stay away from the courthouses and hopefully stay away from the victims and the witnesses that we need in state court.
But we do live in a political world. How do you realistically stay out of the politics?
Well, the way you stay out of the politics is you keep your head down and you focus on your job. Like I said, we have 180,000 criminal cases every single year. I got plenty to do rather than engage in any political squabbling amongst a president, a governor, and a mayor. I'll stay out of that political squabbling, focusing on doing the job of ensuring public safety here in this county.
There are people who are in other countries who view the United States, and I know this for a fact because I travel a bit, actually a lot, and so I do have conversations with people in other parts of the world, and there is this perception, rightly or wrongly, that the United States is kind of the Wild West, and I don't mean necessarily in a geographic term, but you know what I mean. That if they come here, they're going to go into a supermarket and they're going to be held up, or if they send maybe one of their kids to school here for some reason, they're going to be in a school shooting. There is that perception that things are somewhat out of control here, at least compared to certainly some Western European countries, even some Asian countries. You've been involved in law enforcement for years, and you certainly have your finger in the pulse of what is happening here in the LA area. Is that perception that many people, many have around the world about this country, is it far off?
Well, let me focus on that perception as it pertained to LA County, because what happened in 2019, 2020, although this is true for 12 different major district attorneys' offices across the entire country. It wasn't just LA, it was San Francisco, Seattle, Chicago, St. Louis, Miami, Boston, Philadelphia, Washington, New York. So it was major DA's offices that changed political philosophies. So for years and decades, a DA was concerned with two things: the facts and the law. That's what you decided, whether or not you went forward on a case or not. Starting in, I'll now focus back on LA County. In 2020, that changed with the election of my predecessor, George Gascon. All of a sudden, he brought in a political agenda. He called it decarceration. It said that certain crimes and certain criminals now are off limits for prosecution, even if the facts and the law justify the prosecution. So, for instance, he issued 9 special directives on his first day of office that said that if you were a juvenile, someone under 18, and you committed a misdemeanor, let's say stealing just under $950 in this county, the DA's office wasn't going to prosecute you. If you were a gang member and you engaged in a violent crime as part of being a gang member, for 30 years, there had been an enhancement on the books that gave you additional prison time for doing it as a gang member, designed to cripple criminal street gangs. Well, sure enough, he took that enhancement off the ability of his prosecutors to bring it. So what happened is we did see rises in crime, whether it was smash and grab robberies, violent crime, burglaries, auto thefts, homicides over the ensuing 4 years he was in office, because the criminals figured out that if you're going to reduce the consequences, if you're going to reduce accountability in the system, they're just going to commit more rather than fewer crimes. So what happened when I got into office is I came in with an idea to remove that political agenda of decarceration from the discussion. and from the ability of prosecutors to do their job. And I got rid of all 9 special directives on my first day in office. But I didn't replace decarceration with another political philosophy called mass incarceration. Those political extreme philosophies don't work because they're not based on the facts and the law. My approach, I call it the hard work middle or the hard middle, because you actually have to do the work. No more blanket policies. Look at each case individually, the individual defendant and their background, the crime committed and the impact on the victim, to determine who the true threats are to our public safety and need to be behind bars. And those are often the repeat offenders. And as importantly, the ones that aren't. Your first time nonviolent offender still has to pay a debt back to society if they violate society's laws. But that's where non-prison alternatives come into play, whether it's community service, restitution, pay it back if you stole something, or a diversion program if you have, for instance, a serious drug addiction that gives you the choice. You can go to prison, or you can do an 18-month, one day at a time rehab program that, if you successfully get through, will give you a certificate and wipe that crime off your record. So I put in this hard middle philosophy, basically got all the prosecutors who were glad to go back to doing their job on board for, reestablish the partnership with law enforcement that had seen a district attorney's office more interested in prosecuting them than partnering with them, and then went to all the victims groups and said, look, we're back in action to be the champion for victims, because for 4 years, these victim groups basically felt that the DA's office had abandoned them. So I can't say that we've, that there's no crime left in Los Angeles County, but I can say that we're moving now in the right directions. We believe the statistics will show that, and more, as importantly, the sense that you can come now into LA County. The police will do their job, the DA will do their job, hopefully the courts will do their job, and you can get some measure of justice if you actually get harmed, because the ultimate goal, and I want to make this crystal clear, is not to fill the prisons to the breaking point. If anything, and I've said this very publicly, that's the failure of the criminal justice system. The true goal is, can I deter the criminals from committing the crimes in the first place, thus saving a whole lot of victims in the process? So we're hoping by consistently, fairly, and impartially enforcing these laws and making sure that the criminals understand there are real consequences on the other side of the line, that they actually stop doing their criminal activity, or they take it to some other county.
I mentioned this to another guest on this podcast a couple of weeks ago, and I want to kind of get into a little bit of, I hate to use the word legal philosophy, but I will, at least for the moment, use it, and maybe I'll amend it as I go along here. Not that long ago, I was called for jury duty in LA County, as for people who may be in other parts of the world, that periodically happens, usually every few years, and in most jurisdictions, I think, in the United States, for citizens to be called to be on a jury. And I didn't get on a case, but as I was sitting there in the room waiting to be questioned and whether I was going to be selected for a case or not, I did start thinking way back to when I was in school, and probably, Nathan, when you were in school, most Americans, where we were taught about how the criminal justice system is supposed to work in this country. And I remember being taught, and it went through my mind while I was sitting there passing the hours away, waiting to see whether I was going to be on a jury. But I remember being told innumerable times about, the justice system in this country tries to be blind. It's supposed to be fair. It's supposed to not be concerned with one's social status or one's political status or one's economic status. And at the end of the day, crime doesn't pay, shouldn't pay. And then as I was sitting there in that room in the courthouse, I then did start thinking, yeah, but, and by the way, Nathan, here's where I am going to drag you a bit into politics. I kept saying, but what about the White House? What about the fact, and this is not, by the way, a pro or an anti-Trump podcast. I've made that clear on these episodes. That's not what this is about. But on the same hand, the sitting president in the United States, whatever one may think of the case that was against him, has been convicted of, I think it's 34 felony counts by a jury of his peers in the state of New York, and yet he's president in the United States. And as I was sitting there in that room, I kept thinking, is the system really fair? Is it?
So you bring up a lot of the issues appropriately with the criminal justice system in America. I'm actually a student of American history. I also study European history, and have seen different criminal justice systems across the world. I think, having seen these justice systems, we do have the best system, imperfections and all. There are certain systems where there is no jury, where you wouldn't have been sitting around doing anything because the judge is both the investigator, the prosecutor, and ultimately the final sentencer or decider and decision maker of a particular case. These are in many European countries, many African countries, many Asian countries, many South American countries. So again, the fact that we have a jury system that can end, whether it's a grand jury initially or the trial jury that can actually make the final decision on a particular criminal case, I think that's an incredible hallmark. Now, does it mean that in every generation we have to make sure that that system and the constitutional rights are defended and guarded against anybody trying to erode them? 100%. Let me give you two examples, starting in California, of what the California legislature did to try and ferret out not just explicit racial bias in the process, but even implicit racial bias. They passed in several years ago the Racial Justice Act and the Racially Blind Charging Act. The idea was that we're now going to give defense attorneys on behalf of people charged with crimes the ability to ask prosecutors for evidence in their own files that say, has there been a pattern? Not only is there explicit racial bias. I mean, let's say there's a text message between officers saying we just arrested someone because they were of a particular race. That's explicit bias. Certainly that's, you have to give that over anyway. But now, let's say there's a pattern that they only bring charges against, particular people from a particular race, and they don't bring it against people from a different race. That evidence, that pattern evidence, has to now be turned over by prosecutors so the defense can evaluate it and, if appropriate, bring a motion to a judge. It says they have violated the Racial Justice Act and throw out either the entire charging document or the particular crimes that might violate this particular act. Racially blind charging says that when you actually go through an investigative report, you need to redact out all racial identifiers. So for instance, if you get a report from the police and it says a certain person is black or white, a certain witness is black or white, a certain suspect or victim is black or white, or even certain areas that can be identified by race, all that has to get redacted out when the report is evaluated by a prosecutor, then put back in. And if decisions are different between the first evaluation and the second evaluation, the prosecutor needs to explain that difference, turn that explanation over to the courts and the defense to see if it's a valid explanation. So we have been given tools in California in particular to deal with a lot of the problems, because these are problems ultimately that deal with fairness. Now, dealing with, again, the federal system, again, you bring up an issue that's a real issue, where a president got found guilty by a jury in New York of 34 felony violations. Obviously, that's a serious issue, and the president got to defend himself in that court. The jury was 12 people. They made their decision. But what I would say is that the fact, again, that we are in a position here in California, and I'll focus mostly on California, to deal with any inequities in the system as best we can, working to, how they say, we live in an imperfect union where
Yeah.
we're trying to make it more and more perfect. I mean, you could look at the prosecution against Trump by the fact that there even was a prosecution against a former president. Doesn't happen in many different countries. Again, whether you think that's a correct prosecution or not, the fact that there was a prosecution speaks volumes about the U.S. system. And again, here in California, we are doing our best to deal with these inequities that you point out to make sure that everyone views the system as one where Lady Justice does wear that blindfold and doesn't look to see what race, ethnicity, religion, socioeconomic class you're from, but looks at the facts of the law.
But money and power, political power, maybe not all the time, but maybe often, does play a role, doesn't it?
I mean, political power, again, I would point you out to a whole lot of politicians, powerful politicians. Senator Robert Menendez, for instance, who was, at I believe he was in charge of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee at one point.
Mm.
One of the most powerful senators, probably in the last 20 years, is serving 11 years in federal prison for being convicted of bribery. So, I mean, there are, and I can point to, governors from different states, the Illinois governors seem to, take turns going through federal prison. Not our current one, obviously, but there's a whole host of Illinois governors that have gone through. Here in Los Angeles, we have had three former city officials. The former president of the LA City Council ended up spending time in federal prison. I mean, so again, political power in this country, which is again the hallmark of our system, is not your get out of jail free card. It's not even your get out of prosecution free card. Many politicians who've crossed the line have been prosecuted and will continue to be prosecuted because, again, the system truly, I think, will focus on the facts and the law in the overwhelming number of cases. I cannot say every case. Nobody can ever say every. But in the overwhelming vast majority of cases, the facts and the law are what control.
Are there changes that you think ought to be made that either you can't for whatever reason or just too difficult to do? And what would they be, if any?
Well, three of the major problems in the Los Angeles criminal justice system that you discover when you really open up the hood of the DA's office and local law enforcement and see what's going on. Our juvenile justice system is broken. We're having huge issues on the people, the probation office that's in charge of running the facilities to house the juvenile defendants while they're awaiting trial. We have rehabilitation problems where rehabilitation services are not adequately and effectively being brought to individuals who are in these facilities. We have laws that basically, I had this situation very recently where a 14-year-old executed a 15-year-old. And the maximum, I thought that since you can hold someone in a juvenile facility to the age of 25, that again, for first degree violent murder, that 14-year-old would at least be held in the juvenile system until they were 25. Then I found out that the maximum sentence you could give a juvenile in that situation is 7 years. And they don't serve all 7 years. So that 14-year-old will most likely be out by the time they're 18 years old. So we have certain problems in the juvenile system. We have problems with our mental health system, where literally someone, I had this case very recently, could go ahead with it and they suffer from a mental disease, but they took a crowbar and they beat some homeless person within an inch of their life. And because they didn't actually kill them, and we couldn't charge them with murder, but only attempted murder. And by the way, they shouted, vicious racial epithets at that person. So we also charged that individual with hate crimes. And they had a violent past, and they had been in and out of mental health facilities without any success. Turns out that the mental health system allowed them to get mental health diversion against our objection, so that they actually will not be convicted of this crime if they can basically get through a mental health facility unlocked for the next 2 years. So we've got to change our mental health laws. Last huge issue in our county is our jails. Our jails today will hold in the county 12,500 inmates. It's the largest jail system in the United States. The main central jail is called Men's Central Jail. It holds over 4,000 people. Problem, it was built in 1963. It had a 30-year shelf life. It should have been torn down 30 years ago. But it exists today. The County Board of Supervisors, which was all set to build a new facility, a $2.2 billion facility that would have been a state-of-the-art rehab mental health treatment facility as well, basically changed a political direction 5 years ago, paid a $70 million breakup fee to the general contractor who was all ready to build this new facility, promised us new facilities throughout the county, have completely failed in that promise, and now have left us with a legacy of a system that's incredibly broke, incredibly dangerous, unhealthy, does not provide rehabilitation or mental health treatment adequately at all, and with no foreseeable solution in sight. And the reason I highlight these three problems, they're big. They're going to require a whole lot of effort from a lot of people. The jail probably is going to cost us $3 billion to fix at this point, but I'm not going to kick the can down the road and let that be some other DA's problem 4 to 8 to 10 to 12 years from now. We're going to highlight this problem and see what we can do to fix it in the next couple of years.
When I was growing up in New York City, I used to, when I was old enough anyway, and I would sort of be set free to roam, roam around Manhattan at all hours of the day and night. I used to get a kick out of seeing tourist buses unload large groups of tourists onto the streets, and usually there was a tourist guide. And in those days, with I guess a megaphone, I guess it was before they had portable, electronic devices. And they would sort of make an announcement always to the people: make sure you stay together. Manhattan can be a dangerous place. Don't lose sight of your fellow tour person on this bus. And I used to actually roll in laughter because I thought, well, this is hyperbole. This is ridiculous. I roam around Manhattan all the time. I had never had any real concerns. And yet these poor tourists were being scared to death, I thought, being told, make sure that you keep your eyes sharp and open, because otherwise you're going to be a victim of a crime. Should somebody who wants to come to the United States, whether it's LA or anywhere else for that matter, be that concerned, or is that a bit of an exaggeration?
Well, I think that's a bit of an exaggeration. I'll tell you why. And I'm not here to tell you that Los Angeles County doesn't have certain spots that I would recommend you not going into at 11 o'clock at night. I mean, we do have a criminal element, and they're looking to prey on people who are the vulnerable, unsuspecting people. Often tourists can fit in that category if they're wandering around in Skid Row and they end up or in different parts of Los Angeles, and they don't know where they are. But what I would say is that that's true, by the way, of every major city in the world, where I wouldn't be recommending you wander in New York, Chicago, Miami, Dallas, San Francisco, London, Berlin, take your pick of cities around the world. That being said, I think that social media has hyped the lack of safety here, but it's not, as I was explaining earlier, there was a lack of safety. Part of the reason I ran for district attorney as a lifelong Angelino is I did not like the direction safety was moving in our county, where criminals understood that the accountability that they had been used to for decades had been removed. Now we're bringing back that accountability. And does it mean that we're going to have no crime? Certainly not. There's still going to be people who are going to commit crimes in certain situations. But we're bringing in a level, hopefully, of consequence for those actions that they're going to think twice. So, do I highly recommend people from across the world coming to enjoy all that Los Angeles has to offer? Absolutely. I mean, having traveled around this world, you will find no place that can mix the physical beauty of Los Angeles, where literally in the morning you can be sipping some coffee by the ocean, take a hike in the mountains. If you want to go to the desert in the afternoon, you got a 2.5 hour drive. So you can have dinner in the desert. There's no place on earth that offers that type of physical beauty. You marry that with the culture that we have here and the opportunities. I mean, we bring together over 100 different types of 100 different peoples from 100 different languages, 100 different cultures, 100 different countries are represented in the people who live here in Los Angeles. You know, if you want to get great Chinese food and go to Chinatown, if you want to then switch to Korean food and go to Koreatown, you want to go down to Little Saigon and have some of the best Vietnamese food you're ever going to have. Done. If you want the culture and you go to our downtown area and see some of the world-class performances that are going to be brought to LA, you can see concerts here. You can literally, LA has everything. So yes, do we also have to be very conscious to make sure that you're not going in the wrong place at the wrong time? 100%. But we've got tens of thousands of law enforcement officers throughout this county, married now with a district attorney's office that's doing its job. And we believe that we're going to bring a level of safety. So if you want to come here for the World Cup in 2026, you want to visit us for the Super Bowl in 2027, or you want to enjoy the Olympics in 2028, we are getting our house of safety in order for all of that.
Nathan Hochman, District Attorney of the County of Los Angeles, I thank you very much for taking the time to be with us on this podcast. And that does conclude another episode of SOS America, a conversation about America. If you like what you have seen, make a comment on YouTube. Also, of course, you can listen to this wherever you get your podcasts from, and by all means, let us know what you think. Till the next time, I'm Charles Feltman. Thank you.